Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps amplify the messages of our guests and get their work out to the audiences that need it. Before I introduce our guest, President Marc Perrone, the International President of the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union, I want to talk about what unions really mean to me. One of the things that I've been thinking about since COVID-19 began and the pandemic, and the lockdown began, is not only how essential the workers who are part of UFCW and so many other unions are, but how they are really working to protect us all. They're working to make sure that we are all fed. They're working to make sure that we have the resources that we need to survive as a nation. And yet they are not respected. They are not honored in the same way as first responders, like nurses and doctors and firefighters are. And I really think that needs to change. We've talked a lot about that on this live cast, the respect and honor that workers need. But one way to help them do that is to have unions and have collective action and have people, workers working together to fight for their rights. And I think people who didn't previously appreciate labor unions in this country are now more interested in them than ever before. I think that's a really, one of the silver linings to come out of this tragedy is that more people are interested in either joining existing unions or starting unions for different service workers and others. And I think that's, something that I'm really inspired by, how unions have really helped us all, whether we belong to them or not. My parents were both in unions in Chicago. My co-founder, Bernie Pollock, worked at the AFL-CIO for many years before starting Food Tank with me. So I really just want folks to sort of, not have misconceptions about unions, because they are here to protect not just workers, but to protect us all, because the work that they do is so important. And I'm very honored to have President Perrone with us today. Again, he is the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union International, which he has led now since 2014. And he brings more than 4 decades of experience in union activism to his position. He joined the retail clerks, which later became UFCW, in 1971 while working as a clerk at Weingarten's food store in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He learned firsthand the power of collective action and was inspired to step forward as a union representative. He then honed his union organizing skills on campaigns across the country, bringing workers together to have a collective voice on the job in retail stores, meatpacking plants, nursing homes, and many other UFCW represented industries. Marc, am I right that your union represents 1.3 million workers?
Yes, Danny, that is correct.
That's amazing.
And in Canada, it is true.
It's incredible. And again, a lot of those workers are working in the food industry. They've been considered essential during this time. So it's a really important time for those workers to have a voice. So President Perrone, thank you again for being here. I kind of just want to dive right in. We've seen so much on the news lately with meatpacking plants. Smithfield and Tyson have companies that are both union and not union. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as the president of UFCW, is there an opportunity to set really broad standards? And what is the future of finding ways to keep those workers safe from not only COVID-19, but other hazards in the workplace?
Well, I think that we have set some pretty broad standards, whether or not the plants were union or non-union, because we were the first to go to the door and start talking to them about PPE, personal protection equipment. We were first to start talking about hazard pay. And we talked about those issues in general, not just for the union workers.
Sure.
We felt as though that all workers that were deemed essential during this process needed somebody to stand up and speak on their behalf, which is the same thing we did in retail food. Now, there are over 16 million retail food workers.
Right.
And we represent, 1 million of them. And so there were a lot of people that we were speaking on behalf of that, quite frankly, we've never represented personally before, nor have we had an opportunity to stand up on their behalf before. But we did this time, and I think that we did an excellent job in doing that, because we brought their issues to the forefront of society, to where that they knew, for instance, that they needed personal protection equipment. They knew that they were standing in these transmission points, whether or not it was the packing house or whether or not it's those food stores.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think that, by working with those workers who have not been part of the union, that there's an opportunity now to really engage them and help them organize?
Well, I think that there's an opportunity, and we've certainly done that, whether or not it's been Whole Foods or Sprouts or some of the union packing and food processing houses that we've been engaged in. We've certainly had those kind of conversations with them. We know that it's a very difficult set of circumstances with the National Labor Relations Board being how it is today, but it hasn't stopped them from having interest, and it certainly hasn't stopped them from wanting to understand what the process is like.
Absolutely. You mentioned hazard pay, or what some retailers and others have also called hero pay. And I sort of, this is something I've been watching, not super closely, but, have been very interested in it. Partners, a food tank like Farmer's Fridge and Nyman Ranch have paid their workers hazard pay or hero pay. But other retailers who and those in food have, like whether it's Tyson or Purdue and others, have given workers hazard pay, but then taken it away. And we're 3 months or more now into this pandemic, and workers are still in danger, probably more so than they were 3 months ago. How can we make sure that workers are, compensated fairly and justly, and that their health is protected during this time?
Well, I want to be clear about the extra pay. I can't really call it heroes pay, for the following reason. If I'm going to be called a hero, then I'm going to be a hero. It doesn't go away the next day.
Right.
I mean, all of a sudden, because some corporate board has decided they're going to pull the money back, doesn't mean that I'm not still a hero. Because when you needed me, I answered the call. When you were in trouble, I came to your assistance. It wasn't because I wanted to necessarily. It's because I needed to. It was the right thing to do. And that's what my members have done. And that's what a lot of the retail and packing house workers have done in this country. There's no question. But here's the issue. And I don't think that people recognize this. Of all the challenges that these workers faced, whether or not it was having the virus potentially infecting themselves and them taking the virus home to their families or to their parents or to their children, I think you have to understand there's another factor. All the schools were closed. All the care centers were closed. Their ability to have child care or even care to protect their parents or their families that they had at home were eliminated.
Yeah.
And that cost a lot of money. Many cases, at least initially, until we ultimately convinced the employers, many of them were having to provide their own masks. They were having to, provide their own PPE.
Wow.
They were having to bring their own, sanitizers from home because they couldn't get them at work. So if you think about that extra pay, don't think about it in terms that they were ultimately put it in their pockets. You got to think about it in the terms of how much more their expenses got raised.
Yeah.
They just had to go to work. But let's talk about it as it relates to just a business or free enterprise system. Initially, in the initial stages of this, unemployment levels were very low. Part of the reason why the employers offered this extra money was not because they thought, at least initially, that people needed to be appreciated or this was heroes pay. They did it because they were worried that people would get scared because of the virus and quit. And then they wouldn't have anybody to come in and do that work. And then if you think about what happened, once we got to 43 million people unemployed, all of a sudden, back in the boardrooms, they got to talking and they said to themselves, there's really no reason that we offer this extra pay now. Even though that our profits are up, even though that our sales are up, even though that our man hours are up, our productivity's up, all these things are true, but now we don't think they're heroes anymore. We don't think that we're going to appreciate them as much as we used to. And do I think that's wrong? You're damn right I do. It is wrong. They're giving themselves big bonuses right now because their cash flow's up. So do I think that they should ultimately give the recognition? Sure, I do. It's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is the right thing to do. And it is a shame. And it's, a moral problem that they are not doing it right now. And this whole idea of profits over people, watching how well, grocery stores and retailers and even big companies and meat processing are doing it, despite all of their workers getting sick. And it's just crazy to me. And I wonder, what on the other side of this, let's look 6 to 18 months from now when the crisis, the emergency part of it is over. What do you expect these big companies to start doing? Do you think that they'll change, or do we have to keep that constant pressure that you're doing and many other unions are doing?
Let me say the following. Here's one thing I know they're not going to do. I know they're not going to lower the prices. They're going to keep the prices where they are. Look, they've already proved that. Prices were going up. They were saying that they had to increase the pay. They raised prices because of it. Now they're decreasing the pay. They're not necessarily decreasing the prices, though. And so I know they're not going to do that. Do we need to keep the pressure up? As consumers, we do. And whether or not it's through social media, whether or not it's through the media like you're providing here, this opportunity for us to discuss the challenges and problems that these workers are facing. This is the kind of thing that we need to do going forward. Mm-hmm. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. You said that should they be ashamed? Yeah, they should. The question in my mind is whether or not that shame will ultimately change who they are. Will they become the kind of corporation that they say they are, or will they just talk the talk but not necessarily walk the walk? So that's, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such please.
No, I was listening to you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, there's a little bit of a delay. I think that's such an important point about company culture because, when they were paying hazard pay, when they were doing all of these things that, you see these commercials about how companies are working to protect workers right now. And, it's a lot of propaganda, right? And what you want is the company culture to change and for that to be the way going forward. And that where, again, workers are valued and respected and ultimately honored for this work that they do that a lot of folks don't want to do. It's hard. It's arduous. It's often very, very dangerous.
Well, it's dangerous. It's, late hours. It's weekend work. It's time away from their families. They're always gone on the holidays from their families. Look, a lot of the companies have already started to pull back a little bit, whether or not it's in the hero pay. We've heard rumors that some of the companies are going to start pulling back on their PPE. In other words, not providing masks to workers in the stores. We know that they've already, sort of walked away, quite honestly, from the social distancing inside the stores that they have a responsibility to ensure. We know that they're not stopping people that don't wear masks. that come into the stores, even though in some states it's mandatory that people wear masks. But, I live here in the state of Virginia. I live south of the city, close to Quantico, the military base down there. And it is a fairly conservative area because of the military. And I think that when I see people here, probably about 70% are wearing masks, about 30% aren't. Companies aren't really stopping people. And sometimes when our members stop and talk to, the customers, they get abused.
Right.
I mean, it's not really their place to have to do it. Management should step up to the plate and do that. They should make sure that they have the PPE necessary to protect them. Because honest to God, I do not believe that this virus is going to be gone in 18 months.
No.
I think that we'll be in the process of coming up with a vaccine. We may have some therapeutics by then, but do I think the virus is going to be totally gone? No, I don't. And if that's the case, and I'll give you a couple of examples. In our normal grocery stores on a week, they may see 7,000 people during the course of a week. In the initial stages of this pandemic, when the panic buying started happening, in one day, there were 10,000 people going through stores.
Wow.
Because folks were afraid. They were afraid the food supply was at risk, and they were hitting these stores hard. And they were transmission points. We've had in our membership, which is primarily all essential workers. Now, we do represent some hospitals, some long care, senior nursing centers. We represent pharmacies, and we also represent food and packing and food packing and processing. And what I tell you about that is we've had over 227 people that have died so far. Presently, we've got about 28 to 29,000 members who have been either infected or exposed as somebody that's been infected, and have also tested positive for the disease. In the last 30 days in retail food, we've doubled the number of deaths in the retail food industry.
Gosh.
And that's only, you got to understand something, that's only the members that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. The companies haven't been forthright about telling us who's had it. We've had to track all this information ourselves. We're doing all the contact tracing ourselves. And that, in fact, is a dangerous set of scenarios to go down because they're afraid. I'm talking about the companies are afraid that if the customers think that there is a problem or an outbreak in that store, they're afraid the customers will stop coming. And that's what I've got fear about, that the customers themselves, okay, if they start having fear about going to a store, then the company, in fact, is going to start hiding the information more than they are now. And I think that's a problem.
Wow.
The reason why they didn't want to put masks on people in the very beginning, they said no masks, because they were afraid that the CDC had said, unless you're sick, don't wear a mask. And I think that whole thing was very politicized in the initial stages. I think that the CDC, quite honestly, failed the American public and failed us as consumers, and certainly failed my members. Because if everybody had looked at this as a scientific issue, this doesn't matter. This disease doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. If it's going to make you sick. And we should not be politicizing, quite honestly, whether or not you wear a mask.
Agreed.
That is just, it's ridiculous. It's science, not politics.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. The fact that this has become a partisan issue, there should be nothing partisan about it, that it has become politicized, that we weren't getting factual information, that workers and consumers are being put at risk, that consumers don't want to wear masks because they feel it's, their freedom to not wear one. I think there's so much going on here you're right, that's not based on science. And if we had started with science from the beginning, your workers and so many who are not represented by you would not have gotten sick and died, and I think that, again, it's a moral problem for me in so many ways, because we knew how to protect folks and we decided not to. This country decided not to. You mentioned something very interesting to me, which is that, the idea that consumers, because of fear, are not going into these grocery stores and other retailers. And you've seen how much Instacart and other delivery services have grown, even since you were, elected president, which is not that long ago now, 2014. Where do you see sort of the challenges that lay ahead for organizing those kinds of workers and making sure that they're protected?
Well, it's kind of interesting. You should say that, because we just won an election today with some Instacart workers in Chicago.
Nice. Congratulations.
What has happened is that they basically have been dealt a pretty bad hand. Yeah. Instacart workers are, in most cases, are listed as independent contractors, which is not truly correct. They work for the company and they provide services for that company. The company, in order to keep them as independent contractors, can't give them any information, any advice, or any equipment, and they don't. And so now these workers, because of all the challenges that they face, now are looking to us to help them, understand what their risks are. Mm-hmm. And if you'll notice, our website and our information that we put out there is, in fact, useful information for workers to understand how to keep themselves safe, how the customers can keep themselves safe, and how the two together can actually keep both parties safe.
Right.
And so I think Instacart workers have an extraordinary challenge. If you think about it, anybody that's going to be calling those workers anyway can either be one or two things: somebody that's totally afraid to go to the store, or somebody that's on a 14-day quarantine. And why are they on a quarantine? Well, they're on a quarantine because they may have been exposed to somebody, which is then going to put those Instacart workers at even more risk than normal, because they're definitely going to somebody's house that could, in fact, be infected. If that person doesn't have a mask on because of their freedom, and the worker, the Instacart worker, doesn't wear a mask, that's a recipe for disaster. And, those are the things that we think, are going to be problematic as we move forward, whether or not somebody takes and has food delivery services brought to them, or whether or not they go to a grocery store. The issue is we need to protect all of us. It's not a matter of freedom for me that I don't have to wear the mask. I don't walk into a store without any clothes on. They don't allow that.
Right.
And I just don't see the difference. No shirt, no shoes, no service, no mask. It's not any different. I just believe that at this point in time in our society, because of the politicization and the polarization of this country, we have thrown science out the window. Whether or not it's about climate change, or whether or not it's about wearing a mask in order to protect the other citizens in your area. It's the same basic concept. And I think it's a problem for us. We need to truly do something about this. And it is going to take conversation, communication, programs like this. People are going to need to understand that this is not a political side. I mean, I had scientists from Lancet, right? And other, epidemiologists that we brought on board to give us advice on what is the best way to protect our members. Just recently, there was a recent study that was posted in the Washington Post that talked about if everybody wore masks, there'd be a very small percentage, 1 or 2%, that might catch the disease.
Right.
But they didn't catch it from breathing. It was from contact touching.
Right.
Which is a whole lot better than somebody spewing vapor, and then ultimately it affects 5 or 6 people rather than just washing your hands and being very careful. So.
Absolutely. It's a social contract. You know, I don't wear the mask to protect myself. I wear the mask to protect other people, just in case. I mean, it's a social contract.
That's exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes common sense. And you're right. All the best scientists in the world are saying we should all wear masks. But when our political so-called leaders don't do that, it's a very bad example. We had a question from one of our viewers about what the UFCW, what are your thoughts on grocery store worker co-ops, so worker-owned grocery stores?
We're very much in favor of that. We've got a lot of them where workers have organized under the co-op system. We've been pretty successful doing that. I think that the workers themselves, they're trying to manage the fact that they're the boss and the worker at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a challenge at some points, but we certainly have not had any difficulties in representing those workers to our fullest ability.
That's exciting, and I'm excited about cooperative movements in general, whether we're talking about farmer cooperatives or other kinds of cooperatives. I think there's a lot of value in workers being in charge. Of course, they have to learn different skills, and there has to be some consumers have to buy into it as well. But I think all of those things are important. President Perrone, I do want to ask you sort of a difficult question, given what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks in the United States. And there's been a lot of controversy on keeping the police union, the IUPA, and the AFL-CIO. And I'm wondering if you can answer this question. What do you and your members think about this issue, especially as a union that represents a lot of folks who are people of color, who are really more affected by police brutality than any other sort of segment of the United States population?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I read an article by Bill Fletcher, and I don't know if you know Bill or not. He just recently wrote it. An African-American scholar. Ultimately, I think he teaches at Howard University. The bottom line is that I think it's much more problematic than just a quote unquote union. Let's look at where the problems begin. A lot of the police that we have that presently work for us have come out of military situations, right?
Right.
And therefore, there's this force majeure position that if somebody applies force to you, you apply force at a much greater level. Hopefully what happens is that the person becomes submissive. That's one issue. Another issue is the type of training I think that our police sometimes get. The other one is the equipment, because if in fact that you've got all this paramilitary equipment available,
right,
I think at some point in time you're going to start believing that you're going to need it.
Sure.
And I think one of the other challenging areas that we've got is I don't think there's been enough direct contact with supervision when they saw these incidents take place. There's been this tendency to want to protect the workers. I see some of these police chiefs now saying, well, this is because of the union and I couldn't do anything about it. And I don't believe that. As a union representative, I know that there are issues under collective bargaining agreements that we can't help the member if they commit them, right?
Sure.
If somebody steals something, I can't help them, and if somebody is beating somebody or is doing police brutality, should I be able to represent them? The answer is, no, not unless, quite honestly, it's a proven fact that I didn't do it. If you follow where I'm coming from, that innocent person, needs that protection too. But let's go one step further. It's also, in some cases, the prosecutors. Because if the prosecutors were to prosecute those people that were involved in this incident, then I think that we would not have the kind of thing that we've got going on today. So what do I think about it? I think it's a lot more sophisticated and challenging than just it's a union and that's what's going to fix the problem. If the union was gone tomorrow, we'd still have the issue.
Right.
Because we have these other systematic things that are set in the system. And then, you know, and I certainly can't alleviate this issue or not talk about it, but then you have racism, systemic racism in our country. And if those factors all come together, the militarization of our police, racism with individuals, certain individuals, and people who want to stand up for their rights, and quite frankly should, to say to the police, this isn't right. You shouldn't be doing this to me, right? You're going to have a clash, and the outcome is going to be tragic, like we saw in Atlanta or like we saw in Minneapolis.
Sure.
So my perception, you know, should these people be attributed due process? I think they should be attributed due process, but quite honestly, they shouldn't be given a pass on that process. It needs to be a rigorous, challenging discussion of what the facts are. That's what it needs to be. And if all of a sudden a body cam video ends up being blurred or God forsake it disappears,
right.
There's one answer and one answer only. That person needs to be gone and needs to be charged. I believe it, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, you were right. This is a very complex issue and there are lots of layers to it. The foundation of it, however, is systemic racism in this country. And that, you know, the uprisings that we've seen are not just because of police brutality, but because of the racism that is so inherent in our country. And, you know, that's what we all need to work together. You know, folks like us need to be better at listening and being good allies. And, you know, these are complex issues, but they need to be solved, and they need to be solved soon, because this can no longer stand the way police brutality has been going on in this country. I have another, go ahead.
One more thing.
Of course.
We cannot allow there not to be change now.
Right.
We can't. Look, there's been demonstrations in the past and there's been protests in the past, right? The thing that's different this time is that young, old, black, white, all had been standing together to make sure that people understood that this was an issue that had to be dealt with, right? This is an issue that has to be dealt with. There is no question about it.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
And now we can, you know, quietly not talk about it for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then it comes right back. But we can't let that happen. No. We just can't.
I agree. I mean, you yourself are such a true activist, and you've seen a lot of fights in your time, but there is no going back to the way things were. There's no going back to business as usual in our food system, in our retail system, and there's no going back to the way things were, you know, post all of what we've seen over the last few weeks with these amazing demonstrations. And you're right, young and old, and people of all colors really standing together and you know, voicing their concerns and fighting for something that we shouldn't have to fight for because it's 2020, but we still do. And that fight must, you know, go on. But we must figure out a way to solve this. So
we have to figure out what we're going to do as a group, and not to let this go. There's no way that we can let it go. This organization and other organizations like it need to stand up and need to stay in that fight. And we're going to stay in the fight as long as this is going on. And who would have thought? Who would have thought in Atlanta a couple of days ago that we would have seen the things that we saw on television?
Right.
It's got to end, and it's got to end now, you know, because there is no question. What took place down there was murder too.
Absolutely.
That man was running away from the problem. Yes, he was scared, but there was no reason. There was no reason in the world. If I was to do that, let's say somebody broke into my house and started running out of the house and I shot them in the back, they charged me with murder, and I should be charged with murder.
Absolutely. Yeah, these are tough times, but you're right. The fight has to continue, and we all have to be a part of it. I need to ask you another difficult political question. I'm wondering, and I think I already know the answer, but how important is this year's election, both on a national level and on a state and local level, to UFCW members? I think what I'm trying to get at really here is, what are the dangers of keeping the current administration in place to workers?
Well, yeah, it is a tough question, and I tell you the reason why it is tough. I've got members, like I said before, that are Democrats. I got members that are Republicans, and I got members that are independent. And quite honestly, it's their right to choose what political party they're going to support.
Sure.
But here's what I've looked at over the past few months. I've looked at how masks have been politicized by a particular president at the risk of my membership. I've looked at a guy who cleared a crowd, used police force to clear a crowd so that he could go have a photo op. I've seen our major military people in this country rebuke him for what he did, whether or not it was General Kelly, McManus, and others, Stanley McChrystal. It goes on and on and on and on. I've seen our own members cringe at some of the activity.
Sure.
But do I think the election is important? Look, I think that every election is important for our democracy, but I do believe that this election has much more significance to me personally, right? I've seen some of the propaganda that's been put out, and it's been a little bit, well, it's been a lot more vitriolic, more angry, and in some ways scarier to me.
Sure.
It does have a certain feel about it. I'm not going to say what I really think for the following reason, because I don't want to be deemed as a person that's throwing bombs or anything. But if you think about some of the press and some of the comments that the press has gone through, the press is lying. Fake facts, right?
Sure.
Even though there's been all this fact checking and everything else, you shouldn't wear a mask, or you don't have to wear a mask. It's political. It's a political issue.
Right.
When you look at all these things, this is the most important election that I have ever been involved in all the years that I've had the ability to vote. And I can't think of another time that has been more important for me to go out and cast my ballot. We need to eliminate, in these particular times that we're in right now, to eliminate some of the propaganda. And we need to focus on the particular issue at hand that's affecting our society and our country. And whether or not it's Kelly or McManus that ultimately said the following, is that we need to consider the person and the integrity and the character of the individual that's running. That's what we need to do, and we need to think long and hard about it.
Absolutely. President Perrone, I'm wondering also, I work for a food research and advocacy organization. That is what I do. I'm also, as I said at the outset of this, a strong believer in labor unions. And no matter what your political affiliation, I feel that, some, our food system should be nonpartisan. It should be bipartisan. Everyone should have access to safe, healthy, affordable food that's nutritious and delicious. I'm wondering what your thoughts are really on bringing the labor movement and the food movement together. Do you think that COVID-19 has created a real opportunity for that because of everything we've seen and that we can't unsee now, whether it's the meat, the folks getting sick at meat processing plants, or, how scared in some cases, retail workers, food retail workers are to go to work, but they have to?
Well, I do think there's an opportunity, and I think that we've done a little bit of that, American Farmers Union and things like that. So we've had some connections, because look, they totally understand that if we can't process that food that we need so desperately, if we can't process it, they can't sell it.
Right.
We know that if we can't create the point of sale, get it out the door, out of that grocery store, that they can't sell it. But we've always been fairly close to farmers. In fact, my grandparents were farmers. My dad was a farmer. My grandparents' grandparents were farmers. We've raised, corn, cotton, cattle, maize, different products that ultimately ended up in the food supply or the food chain in some way, shape, form, or fashion, or the clothes that we wore.
Sure.
So under those circumstances and understanding, how the commodity systems work in this country, if we don't act in unison together, we can pretty much assume, given the large agribusiness companies that are out there, that we're either going to be, part of the solution, or we're going to be, quite honestly, on the dinner table, feeding them.
Sure.
That's, I don't really know how else to say it. I think that we have a responsibility as concerned citizens, that we make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have access to food. What was interesting, and here's something I saw yesterday on national television, which I've never seen before, is a discussion about food deserts.
Oh, wow.
And, to see that, and I've certainly been talking about it for years.
Sure.
My union's been talking about it for years. We've had conversations with countless numbers of employers about the necessity and the need for them to move into urban areas of this country to provide a good, high quality place for people to purchase their food, to get access to real, fresh fruit, vegetables, in other words, be connected to the world market, right? Now,
Absolutely.
If that happens, given everything that we're experiencing right now, whether or not it's COVID-19 or whether or not it's been the demonstrations that we've seen recently, all those things are starting to come together, and people are talking about some of those issues that are good for both of us, whether or not it's food or whether or not it's the UFCW, or whether or not it's those workers in those stores or those packing houses, or whether or not it's the consumer at the ground level that is getting the opportunity to get access to that food.
Yeah, I think those connections, those dots are finally being put together, and where eaters or consumers really understand the importance of workers. And that's, again, another bright spot in this terrible tragedy of this pandemic, that, the veil has been lifted. There's so much now that consumers know about that they didn't know before. They know, the peril that workers are often placed in. So I think, again, despite the tragedy, it's such an exciting time, and it's an exciting time to bring these movements together in a more cohesive way, in a more strategic way, especially in an election year. And again, I truly believe that Republican or Democrat, these are not partisan issues. These are issues that we should all sort of get behind. But because of lack of political leadership, especially at the federal and national level, we've lost that ability to work together. And I hope that this election we can sort of, break that wall that has been created between Republicans and Democrats and other parties and really start working together again because we have real leadership in place. Before I ask you the last question, which I always ask everyone the same last question, I want to make sure people know how to get in touch. They can go to UFCW.org. They can follow you on Twitter at Marc_Perrone. So again, that's UFCW.org. So President Perrone, I'm wondering, given, all of the amazing people that you interact with every day, is there a person who's been inspiring you the most over the last 3 months?
Probably two people, actually, I would say, that have been the most inspiring to me, and both of them are political figures. One was Andrew Cuomo in New York for the position that he took and how he dealt with COVID-19 in his state. And the other one is Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey. Both those gentlemen, in my opinion, went against, I guess, public opinion on the early stages, knew what the situation was, and ultimately tried to shut things down. Because if you think about it, while we had the western side of the country that got closed down fairly quickly, nobody thought about the people coming from the other side of the world that might be bringing the virus into the country. And it had gotten totally out of hand, before we even recognized it was there. And so those are two political figures that I think, I admire, because they did things and said things that quite frankly could have cost them some political capital. I also think that General Kelly and General McManus are inspiring because, quite honestly, they spoke out against what was happening just recently, and totally showed the American public that division and the attempt to create division in our country is wrong. It goes against all of our principles. So I think on COVID, it was those two governors. On the demonstrations, I think it was McManus and Kelly. And I know they're two white generals. I know that.
Sure.
Right. But in some respects, because of who they had worked for previously, right, for them to take that position, right, was extremely difficult for them to do. And I think they set the tone for all U.S. citizens, regardless of their skin color, that we need to stand up, vote for somebody that's going to have integrity and character, and move forward with that. Absolutely.
This division, like the other things that we've talked about, cannot continue. We need a leader, and we need leaders at every level who bring us together, who do not tear us apart. President Perrone, you have been a pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much for joining me today. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, We Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And I hope folks will join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to President Valdemar Velasquez of the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. Thank you so much. President Perrone, please stay safe and well.
Danny, thank you so much. And you stay safe and well as well. But let me say this, from this point forward, you can't call me President Perrone. You got to call me.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Marc. Take care. Bye. Thank you.